Emma Chen stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the trendy downtown restaurant, her hands trembling slightly as she touched up her lipstick. 5 weeks. 5 incredible weeks of dating Jake Morrison, and tonight felt different. There was an electricity in the air during their phone call earlier, a nervous excitement in his voice when he'd asked her to meet him at their usual spot. She smoothed down her emerald green dress, the one he'd complimented on their second date, and took a deep breath. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman who had revolutionized online dating was terrified of where her own relationship was heading. Walking back to their corner table at Meridian, she spotted Jake immediately. Even in the dimly lit restaurant, his sandy brown hair caught the candlelight, and those warm hazel eyes that had captivated her from their very first coffee date were focused intently on his phone. He was probably checking his messages on HeartSync, the dating app that had brought them together, the app she had created. "Sorry about that," Emma said, sliding back into her seat. "Long line." Jake looked up, his face breaking into that boyish grin that made her stomach flutter every time. "No worries, I was just—" He hesitated, sliding his phone face down on the table. "Actually, I was thinking, dangerous territory for you," Emma teased, reaching for her wine glass. The familiar banter came easily between them, but she could sense something different tonight. There was a weight to his words, a seriousness that hadn't been there during their previous dates. "Emma," Jake began, his fingers drumming nervously against the white tablecloth, "these past 5 weeks have been amazing. I mean, really amazing." Her heart began to race. "They have been. I keep thinking about that first message you sent me on HeartSync. You said you were looking for someone who believed in serendipity." He laughed softly. "I thought it was such a unique way to start a conversation." Emma's mouth went dry. She remembered crafting that message carefully, using her own algorithm's data to determine what would resonate most with Jake's profile. She'd spent hours analyzing his responses to other matches, his interests, his communication patterns. What he thought was serendipity had actually been calculated precision. "I've never believed in fate or destiny or any of that stuff," Jake continued, leaning forward. "But meeting you, it feels like the universe conspired to bring us together, you know." The irony was crushing. There had been no cosmic conspiracy, just lines of code, machine learning algorithms, and Emma's own desperate attempt to find love using the technology she'd created. She'd been beta testing her own app for months, watching as it matched her with men who looked good on paper but felt wrong in person. Then she'd seen Jake's profile, and something had shifted. For the first time, she'd wanted the algorithm to work. "Jake," she started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish this. I've been practicing in the mirror for 3 days." His cheeks flushed slightly, and Emma felt her heart break a little more. "I know it's only been 5 weeks, but I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge she was terrified to cross. Because once she crossed it, once she told him the truth about who she was and what she'd done, there would be no going back. "I love how passionate you get when you talk about your work in tech," Jake continued, oblivious to her internal turmoil. "I love that you always order dessert first when we go to new places. I love that you text me good morning every day, even though you're not a morning person. I love that you listen to my crazy ideas about expanding the coffee shop without making me feel stupid." Emma's throat tightened. Every detail he mentioned had been carefully curated through their conversations. But his feelings were real, painfully, beautifully real. "But there's something I need to tell you," Jake said, his voice dropping lower. "Something I probably should have mentioned before now." Emma's blood turned to ice. Was he about to reveal a secret of his own? Was this the moment where everything fell apart anyway, making her own confession irrelevant? "I've been married before," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on his wine glass. "It ended 2 years ago. She left me for her co-worker, someone she met through work. And ever since then, I've had this fear that anyone I date is going to have some hidden agenda, some secret that will destroy everything good between us." The cruel irony of his words hit Emma like a physical blow. Here he was, opening his heart to her, sharing his deepest fear, and she was sitting across from him, harboring exactly the kind of secret he was afraid of. "Jake," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. I know it's probably stupid, he rushed on, misreading her tone. But with you, I don't feel that fear. You're so genuine, so transparent about everything. When you talk about your work, your dreams, your terrible relationship with your stepmother, you hold nothing back. It's one of the things I love most about you. Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to reach across the table and take his hand, to tell him that his trust wasn't misplaced, that she was exactly who he thought she was. But she wasn't. She was the creator of the app that had brought them together, the architect of their supposedly serendipitous meeting. I need to tell you something too, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. Jake's expression shifted, concern replacing the vulnerability that had been there moments before. What is it? Emma looked around the restaurant, at the other couples sharing intimate dinners, at the servers weaving between tables with practiced efficiency, at the world that would keep spinning regardless of what happened in the next few minutes. The night we matched on HeartSync, she began, her heart hammering against her ribs. I had been on the app for months. I'd gone on dozens of first dates, a handful of second dates, and exactly 0 third dates. Jake's brow furrowed slightly, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. I was starting to think that maybe online dating just wasn't for me, that maybe the whole concept was flawed. She paused, gathering her courage. But then I saw your profile, and something was different. The way you talked about your coffee shop, your dreams of creating a community space, your love for old movies and terrible puns, it all felt so real in a sea of generic profiles. It was real, Jake said softly, every word. I know, and that's what scared me. Emma's hands were shaking now, and she clasped them together in her lap to steady them. Because for the first time in months, I really wanted it to work. I wanted you to message me back. I wanted that first coffee date to lead to a second and a third, and she trailed off. And here we are, Jake finished, his smile returning. 5 weeks later, and I'm telling you, I think I'm falling in love with you. The moment stretched between them, pregnant with possibility and terror. Emma knew that this was her chance, her last chance to tell him the truth before they crossed into territory that would make her deception unforgivable. Jake, she said, his name a prayer on her lips. There's something else. Something about how we met that I need to. Emma Chen. They both turned at the sound of her name. A young woman approached their table, her face bright with excitement and recognition. Oh my God, it is you. I'm such a huge fan of HeartSync. The app literally changed my life. I met my fiancé through it 6 months ago. The woman gestured to a man waiting by the restaurant's entrance. Could I possibly get a picture? My friends are never going to believe I met the Emma Chen in person. Emma's world tilted on its axis. Across from her, Jake's face had gone completely blank, his hazel eyes wide with shock and confusion. The Emma Chen, he repeated slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman laughed, apparently oblivious to the tension she'd just created. You know, the founder and CEO of HeartSync, the woman who revolutionized online dating. She's like, totally famous in tech circles. Emma felt the bottom drop out of her world as she watched understanding dawn in Jake's eyes. Sofia Rodriguez adjusted her black blazer for the 3rd time as she walked through the bustling streets of Chelsea, her heels clicking against the pavement with determined precision. The autumn air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor, mixing with the exhaust fumes and creative energy that seemed to pulse through New York's art district. She was running late for her date with Marcus, and the irony wasn't lost on her that she was hurrying through the very neighborhood where his murals had first caught her attention 3 years ago. Back then, she'd been walking these same streets as the newly appointed curator of the prestigious Whitmore Gallery, fresh from her master's program and eager to make her mark on the city's art scene. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Found us a table at the corner spot. Take your time, beautiful. The casual endearment made her smile despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. 5 weeks of dating Marcus Williams had been like discovering a hidden masterpiece in a forgotten storage room, unexpected, breathtaking, and somehow perfect. But tonight, she could feel the weight of her secret pressing against her chest like a stone. She spotted him immediately through the restaurant's large windows. Marcus sat at a small table, his dark hair slightly tousled from the wind. wearing the paint-stained denim jacket that had become his signature look, even in repose. There was an energy about him, an alertness that spoke to his artist's eye constantly, cataloging the world around him. "Sorry I'm late," Sophia said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Gallery emergency." Marcus looked up from the sketch he'd been working on apparently. He couldn't sit idle for 5 minutes without creating something, and his face lit up with that smile that had disarmed her completely on their first date. "Another crisis in the world of high art," he teased, closing his sketchbook. "Let me guess, someone hung a Pollock upside down, you joke. But that actually happened last month." Sophia laughed, grateful for the easy conversation that always flowed between them. Though tonight it was more about a temperamental installation artist who decided our lighting wasn't spiritually aligned with his vision. "Ah, the eternal struggle between artistic vision and practical reality," Marcus said, signaling the waiter. "Speaking of which, I have some news." Something in his tone made Sophia's stomach tighten. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, I think." "Great news, actually." Marcus leaned forward, his dark eyes sparkling with excitement. "Remember that mural I've been working on in Bushwick, the one about community resilience?" Sophia nodded. She'd heard him talk about it for weeks, how he'd been collaborating with local residents to tell their stories through art, how he'd been funding it entirely out of his own pocket from his day job at the construction company. Well, apparently someone important saw it. Someone from the art world. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sophia had learned meant he was either nervous or excited. Tonight, it seemed to be both. "They reached out through my Instagram, said they wanted to discuss potential opportunities." "That's wonderful," Sophia said, and she meant it. She'd seen photos of Marcus's work, had even driven out to Brooklyn one afternoon to see the Bushwick mural in person. His art was raw, honest, and powerful in a way that most gallery pieces weren't. He deserved recognition. "The thing is," Marcus continued, "I keep thinking about what might have been different if I'd had this kind of opportunity earlier. You know, when I was younger and maybe more hungry for traditional success." Sophia's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the table. "I applied to show at galleries when I first moved to the city. Must have sent out 50 applications, portfolio packages, the whole thing. Got rejected by every single one." The stone in Sophia's chest grew heavier. "There was this one rejection that really got to me," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a reflective quality. "From the Whitmore Gallery. It wasn't just a form letter. Someone had actually taken the time to write a detailed critique of my work. They said my art lacked sophisticated conceptual framework and showed technical proficiency without emotional depth." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered writing those words. She remembered Marcus's submission, a series of portraits of construction workers during their lunch breaks, painted with such tenderness and humanity that they'd taken her breath away. But she'd been new to her position, eager to prove herself to the gallery's board, and Marcus's work hadn't fit the minimalist, conceptual aesthetic that was trending at the time. "It destroyed me for months," Marcus said, his voice matter-of-fact, rather than bitter. "I almost gave up art entirely. Figured if someone with that much expertise thought my work was shallow, maybe I wasn't cut out for this world." "Marcus," Sophia whispered. "But he wasn't finished. But you know what? That rejection changed everything for me. It forced me to think about why I make art, who I'm making it for. Instead of chasing gallery approval, I started painting murals in neighborhoods that never see their stories told. I started working with communities, making art that actually means something to people's daily lives." He reached across the table and took her hand, his paint-stained fingers warm against her palm. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand who I am now, before things get more serious between us. I'm not the guy who's going to wine and dine you at gallery openings, or impress your curator friends with my connections. I'm the guy who gets his hands dirty, who believes art should live in the streets as much as in museums." Sophia felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The man sitting across from her, this beautiful, passionate, principled man, had become who he was partly because of her rejection. And now he was apologizing for not being the kind of person she supposedly would want. not knowing that she'd fallen in love with exactly who he'd become. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's chatter. Marcus squeezed her hand. "What is it?" Sophia looked into his eyes, those dark, expressive eyes that she'd been losing herself in for 5 weeks, and felt her courage falter. How could she tell him that she was the person who'd almost destroyed his artistic dreams? How could she explain that the woman he was falling for was the same curator who'd dismissed his work as emotionally shallow? She started, then stopped. "I think what you do is incredible. The way you connect with communities, the way your art tells real stories, it's more valuable than anything hanging in any gallery." Marcus's smile was radiant. "Thank you. That means more to me than you know, especially coming from someone who works in that world." The irony was suffocating. Here he was, valuing her opinion because of her position in the art world, not knowing that she was the embodiment of everything he'd decided to reject. "Sophia," Marcus said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "These past 5 weeks have been incredible. I know we said we'd take things slow, but I can't pretend anymore. I'm falling in love with you." The words hit her like a physical blow. He was falling in love with her, and she was living a lie. "I love how you light up when you talk about the artists you work with," Marcus continued. "I love how you see beauty in everything, even in my paint-stained clothes and terrible apartment. I love that you understand why art matters, even if we come at it from different angles." Sophia felt like she was drowning. Every word he spoke made her deception feel more unforgivable. "But I need you to know," Marcus said, his voice growing more serious, "that I could never be with someone who wasn't genuine. My ex, she pretended to support my art, but really she was embarrassed by it. She wanted me to get a real job, to give up the murals and try to fit into her world instead." The parallel to her own situation was devastating. She wasn't asking him to change, but she'd been hiding a fundamental part of who she was, the part that had once rejected everything he stood for. "Marcus," she said, pulling her hand free from his, "there's something I need to tell you. Something about my work, about who I am." His expression shifted, concern replacing the warmth that had been there moments before. "What is it?" Sophia looked around the restaurant, at the exposed brick walls decorated with local artists' work, the kind of art Marcus championed, the kind she'd learned to value because of him, the kind she'd once dismissed as not sophisticated enough for her gallery. "When I said I work at the Whitmore Gallery," she began, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I didn't tell you exactly what I do there." Marcus waited, his dark eyes searching her face. "I'm not just an employee," Sophia continued, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I'm the head curator. I'm the one who decides which artists get shows, which work gets displayed, which applications get approved or rejected." She watched as understanding began to dawn in his eyes, saw the moment when he started to piece together the implications of what she was telling him. "Sophia," he said slowly, "how long have you been the head curator?" 3 years, she whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. Round them, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm, servers delivering plates, couples laughing over wine, the soft clink of silverware against ceramic. But at their small corner table, the world had stopped. 3 years, Marcus repeated, his voice flat. "So when I applied to the Whitmore Gallery, when I got that rejection letter—" "It was me," Sophia said, the words tearing at her throat. "I wrote that critique. I rejected your application." Marcus leaned back in his chair as if she'd physically struck him. The color had drained from his face, and his hands lay flat on the table, no longer reaching for hers. "You," he said, the single word heavy with disbelief and hurt. "You're the one who said my work lacked emotional depth." Sophia nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong." 5 weeks, Marcus said, his voice growing harder. 5 weeks you've been sitting across from me, listening to me talk about that rejection, about how it changed my life, and you never said anything. I wanted to tell you when." Marcus's voice cracked. "When were you planning to tell me?" "After I fell completely in love with you. After I introduced you to my friends, my community, the people whose stories I paint." The hurt in his voice was unbearable. Sophia reached across the table, but Marcus pulled his hands away. "I fell in love with who you became, she said desperately. Your work now, the way you connect with people, the way you make art that matters. I fell in love with all of that. You fell in love with the man I became despite what you did to me. Marcus corrected, his dark eyes now cold and distant. There's a difference. Claire Thompson sat in her car outside Morrison's Books, watching through the rain-streaked windshield as Ryan Foster arranged a new display. In the front window, even from across the street, she could see the careful attention he paid to each book's placement, the way he stepped back to assess the visual balance before making small adjustments. Her heart clenched as she recognized the books he was featuring, the latest releases from several romance authors, including 3 copies of Midnight in Tuscany by C.L. Thorne, her book, her latest bestseller, written under the pseudonym that had made her famous and kept her real identity secret. For the past 5 years, 5 weeks of dating Ryan, and he had no idea that the shy, quiet woman he'd been falling for was actually one of the most successful romance novelists of the decade. Claire's phone buzzed with a text from her editor. Book signing at Brennan's tomorrow night. Sold out in 2 hours. You're a phenomenon, CL. She turned off the phone and stepped out into the October drizzle, pulling her wool coat tighter around her shoulders. The bell above Morrison's door chimed as she entered, and Ryan looked up from behind the counter, his face breaking into the warm smile that had first captivated her when she'd wandered into his bookstore 6 weeks ago, looking for a quiet place to write. There's my favorite customer, he said, coming around the counter to greet her with a soft kiss. Right on time for our lunch date. Claire inhaled the familiar scent of old paper and coffee that permeated the bookstore, mixed with Ryan's subtle cologne. Sorry if I'm a little wet. It's really coming down out there. Perfect weather for staying inside with a good book, Ryan said, his green eyes twinkling. Speaking of which, I have something to show you. He led her to the front window display she'd been watching from her car. What do you think? I'm calling it Escape into Romance. October's been slow, so I figured I'd highlight some of the bestsellers. Claire's stomach twisted as she looked at her own book prominently displayed among the others. The cover, a silhouette of a couple against a Tuscan sunset, mocked her from behind the glass. It's beautiful, she managed. You have a real talent for this. Thanks. I love creating displays that tell a story, you know. Like this C.L. Thorne book. Ryan picked up one of the copies of Midnight in Tuscany. This author is incredible. She writes these sweeping, emotional stories that just transport you completely. Her characters feel so real, like you could run into them on the street. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. You've read her work, all of it, Ryan said enthusiastically. I'm probably one of the few straight guys who'll admit to being obsessed with romance novels. But her writing transcends genre. She understands human nature in this profound way. I actually hand sell her books to customers who think they don't like romance. The praise should have made Claire happy, but instead, it felt like another layer of deception. Ryan was falling in love with her writing without knowing it was hers, and falling for her without knowing she was the author whose work he admired. Have you ever wondered what she's like in person? Claire asked, unable to stop herself. C.L. Thorne, all the time, Ryan admitted. She's incredibly private, no photos, no social media presence, very few interviews. But from her writing, I imagine she's someone who's experienced real heartbreak, real joy. Someone who pays attention to the small moments that make life beautiful. Claire's throat tightened. His description was more accurate than he knew. Every heartbreak, every moment of joy she'd ever experienced had found its way into her novels. I actually have tickets to her book signing tomorrow night, Ryan continued. Wanna come with me? I know you're not usually into big events, but I'd love to meet her, maybe get a book signed for the store. Claire felt the room spin slightly. Tomorrow night's signing was at Brennan's Books, the large chain store across town. She'd be there as C.L. Thorne, wearing the elegant dresses and polished persona her publicist had crafted, signing books for hundreds of fans. The thought of Ryan seeing her there, potentially recognizing her. I can't tomorrow night, she said. Quickly, I have family obligations. Ryan's face fell slightly. Of course. I should have asked earlier. Maybe next time. The easy way he accepted her excuse made Claire feel even worse. In 5 weeks of dating, Ryan had never pressured her about anything, not about her mysterious work schedule, not about why she was so secretive about her writing, not about why she always paid cash and seemed uncomfortable when he tried to look up her phone number in the bookstore system. "Claire," Ryan said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "can we talk about something?" Her heart rate spiked. "What about?" Ryan led her to the small seating area at the back of the store, to comfortable armchairs arranged near a window that looked out onto the alley behind the building. This was where they'd had their first real conversation, where she'd sat with her laptop for hours, pretending to work on freelance articles while actually writing scenes for her next novel. "These past 5 weeks have been incredible," Ryan began, settling into the chair across from her. "I know we agreed to take things slow, but I can't pretend anymore that this is just casual for me." Claire gripped the arms of her chair, preparing herself for whatever was coming. "I'm falling in love with you," Ryan said simply. "I love your intelligence, your kindness, the way you listen when I ramble about books. I love that you understand why stories matter, why bookstores like this one are important even when they're not profitable." Each word felt like a small knife to Claire's heart. He was falling in love with a version of her that wasn't complete, wasn't honest. "But I need to be honest with you about something," Ryan continued, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been hurt before. Badly. My ex-fiancée, she lived a double life. For 2 years. She told me she was working as a marketing consultant, traveling frequently for clients. Turned out she was actually a pharmaceutical sales rep who was having an affair with a doctor in another city." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. The parallel to her own situation was horrifying. "The lying destroyed me more than the cheating," Ryan said, his voice growing quiet. "It made me question everything I thought I knew about love, about trust. It's taken me 3 years to even consider dating seriously again." "Ryan," Claire whispered, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. What I'm trying to say is that honesty is everything to me now. I'd rather know a painful truth than live with a beautiful lie, and with you." He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. "With you, I feel like I can trust again. You're so genuine, so transparent about your thoughts and feelings." The irony was crushing. Ryan thought she was transparent when in reality, she'd been hiding the most fundamental part of herself, her career, her success, her entire public identity. "I need to tell you something," Claire said, her voice barely audible above the rain pattering against the window. Ryan's expression shifted, concern replacing the vulnerability that had been there moments before. "What is it?" Claire looked around. The bookstore, at the carefully curated shelves, at the handwritten staff recommendations, at the cozy reading nooks that Ryan had created to make the space welcoming. This place was his dream, his passion project that barely broke even but filled his life with purpose. "When I told you I was a freelance writer," she began, her heart hammering against her ribs, "I wasn't lying exactly, but I wasn't telling you the whole truth either." Ryan's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "What do you mean, my writing?" "It's not just freelance articles and blog posts." Claire forced herself to meet his eyes. "I write fiction, novels." "That's wonderful," Ryan said, his face lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "Are you published?" "I'd love to read your work." The innocent excitement in his voice made everything worse. Claire pulled her hand free from his and stood up, walking to the window to put some distance between them. "I am published," she said, her back to him. "Very published, actually." "Claire, that's amazing. Why didn't you tell me? I mean, I know how hard it is to make it as a novelist. You should be proud." Claire turned to face him, tears already beginning to blur her vision. "I write under a pen name. I have for 5 years now." Ryan's brow furrowed slightly, but his smile remained okay. "A lot of authors use pseudonyms. What name do you write under?" The moment stretched between them like a chasm. Claire could hear the rain getting heavier outside, could hear the old building settling around them, could hear her own heart beating so loudly she was sure Ryan could hear it too. "C.L. Thorne," she whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire watched as understanding dawned in Ryan's eyes, saw the exact moment when he realized what she was telling him. "C.L. Thorne," he repeated slowly, his voice flat with shock. "The C.L. Thorne. The author whose books I've been raving about for the past 5 weeks. Claire nodded, unable to speak. Ryan stood up from his chair, running his hands through his brown hair. You're C.L. Thorne. You're one of the most successful romance novelists in the world. And you've been sitting in my bookstore, letting me talk about your books like some starstruck fan. It wasn't like that, Claire said desperately. I never meant for it to go on this long. At first, I thought we'd just have coffee once or twice, and it wouldn't matter. But then I started falling for you, and the longer I waited to tell you, the harder it became. 5 weeks, Ryan said, his voice growing harder. 5 weeks of me going on and on about C.L. Thorne's brilliant writing, about how much I admire her work, about how I'd love to meet her someday. And you just sat there, listening to me make a fool of myself. You weren't making a fool of yourself, Claire protested. Everything you said about my work, it meant everything to me. More than any professional review or bestseller list. Your work, Ryan repeated bitterly. God, Claire, do you have any idea how this feels? I've been falling in love with 2 different people, the shy, mysterious woman who drinks tea in my bookstore, and the brilliant author whose words have gotten me through some of my darkest nights. And now I find out they're the same person, and neither one of them was real. I am real, Claire said, stepping toward him. Everything between us has been real. My feelings for you, the way you make me laugh, the way I feel when I'm with you, none of that was an act. Ryan backed away from her, shaking his head. But the foundation was built on a lie. You let me bare my soul to you about how honesty matters to me, about how my ex-fiancé's deception destroyed my ability to trust. And all the while, you were hiding the biggest part of who you are. The hurt in his voice was unbearable. Claire reached out to him, but he stepped further away. Tomorrow night, Ryan said suddenly, his eyes widening with a new realization. The book signing you can't attend because of family obligations. You can't attend because you'll be there signing books as C.L. Thorne. Claire nodded miserably. How many other lies have there been? Ryan asked. The mysterious work schedule. The way you always pay cash. The reason you're so secretive about everything, how much of what I thought I knew about you is actually true. My feelings for you are true, Claire said. Tears flowing freely now. Everything else, the career, the success, the public persona, that's all just background noise. What matters is us, what we have together. What we have together is built on deception, Ryan said, his voice breaking, just like with Sarah. I thought I'd learned to recognize the signs, but you're even better at it than she was. The comparison to his ex-fiancée felt like a physical blow. Claire sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd lost. I need you to leave, Ryan said quietly, not looking at her. I need time to think, to figure out what's real and what isn't. Ryan, please, just go. Claire, or CL, or whoever you really are. Isabella Martinez stood outside Aurelius, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as David Park moved through his kitchen, with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. Even from the sidewalk, she could see the focused intensity on his face as he plated what looked like his signature duck confit, the dish that had first caught her attention when she'd reviewed his previous restaurant 2 years ago, the review that had ended his career at Le Bernardin, the review that had forced him to start over from nothing. Her phone buzzed with a message from David. Table for two ready in 10 minutes. Can't wait to see you. Isabella's stomach churned as she read the text. 5 weeks of dating David, and tonight, he was finally ready to share something important with her, something about his culinary background that he'd been hesitant to discuss. She had a terrible feeling she knew exactly what he wanted to tell her. The hostess recognized her immediately when she walked through Aurelius's doors. Ms. Martinez, right this way. Chef Park has prepared something special for you. Isabella followed her through the dimly lit dining room, past tables filled with couples sharing intimate dinners. The restaurant was beautiful, modern, but warm, with exposed brick walls and Edison bulb fixtures that cast everything in a golden glow. It was exactly the kind of place she would have recommended in her column for the Chicago Tribune. David appeared at her table before she'd even settled into her seat, his chef's coat replaced by a simple black button-down that made his dark eyes look even more intense. You look beautiful, he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. His hands smelled like herbs and garlic, sense that had become intoxicately familiar over the past 5 weeks. "This place is incredible, David," Isabella said, looking around at the bustling restaurant. "You should be proud." "I am," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Finally. It's taken 2 years to get here, but I think we're actually going to make it." A server appeared with a bottle of wine Isabella didn't recognize. "From Chef Park's personal collection," the young woman explained as she poured 2 glasses. "David, you didn't have to. I wanted to," he interrupted, raising his glass, "to new beginnings, and to taking chances on people who might surprise you." Isabella felt her throat tighten as she clinked her glass against his. If only he knew how surprised he was about to be. "Isabella," David said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "there's something I need to tell you. Something about my past that I should have mentioned before now. Here it comes," Isabella thought, her heart racing. "I know I've been vague about my culinary background," David continued, his fingers nervously turning his wine glass. "It's not that I was trying to hide anything. Exactly. It's just complicated." Isabella nodded, not trusting herself to speak. 2 years ago, I was the head chef at Le Bernardin. It was my dream job, working under one of the most respected chefs in Chicago, being part of a kitchen that was getting national attention. David's expression grew distant. "I thought I had everything figured out. I was arrogant, maybe. Definitely naive." Isabella's chest felt tight. She remembered David from those days, younger, cockier, full of ambition and innovation that hadn't yet been tempered by failure. "We were getting ready for a major review from the Tribune," David continued. "Everyone knew it could make or break us. I was so confident, so sure that my food would speak for itself.